You know, the more of this cult stuff I hear, the more convinced I am that Beskar goes with everything. Hey y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Episode 2 of Season 3 of The Mandalorian is officially out on Disney Plus today, and while it is a slight improvement on the last episode, I can't say that I'm super stoked about this season. For the non-spoiler part of my review, I rate this episode a 7 out of 10. While it does have some really cool moments that seem to be leading into some big stuff for the rest of the season, unfortunately, this season of The Mandalorian is plagued with an energy that feels more fit to Saturday morning cartoons than a Star Wars series that's actually compelling to anybody over the age of 12. Once again, this episode is very much filled with Grogu merchandise fodder, cheap one-liners, and convenient disaster that just doesn't feel well thought out. This episode of the series doesn't feel as cohesive as some of the episodes from previous seasons, but I will say that this season does seem to be moving considerably faster, and I can appreciate that this episode was very much lacking in side quests. Episode 2 of Season 3 is also chock full of some fun Easter eggs. So with that being said, let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 2 of season 3 of The Mandalorian. You've been warned. We open on Tatooine, where a Rodian is having to haggle with famed mechanic Peli Motto in order to get his speeder fixed. Peli Motto decides to cut the Rodian a deal, considering it's Boonta Eve. This is our first Easter egg. Boonta Eve is actually first mentioned in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and it's a holiday that celebrates the ascension of Boonta the Hutt to godhood. Whatever that means. Some Jawas come in and quickly slap on the pieces of the speeder that the Rodian was complaining about, which goes to show you that Peli Motto, once again, always fits into the seedy mechanic stereotype. Mando's iconic N1 lands in the depot, and Grogu happily leaps into Peli Motto's arms, in a way that is entirely too Yoda in the prequels for me to be comfortable with, but what can we do? We also get our second Easter egg right here. Peli tells Grogu that he is leaping like a Lurman. Of course, this is a reference to a species seen in the Clone Wars. They're actually a small monkey-like species that were really good at jumping, and of course, that's why Peli makes this reference. Peli and Din Djarin get to chatting as to why he's back on Tatooine. And we get another Easter egg when Peli asks him if he's here to take out Boba Fett. Of course, the last time we saw Boba and the last time we saw Mando before the start of this season, Mando was actually helping Boba clean up the streets of Tatooine, along with Boba's gang of scooter-riding spy kids. I'm so praying that they just brought him up as like a random reference and not because they're planning on including him in this season or giving him another season of the Book of Boba Fett. They ruined him. I honestly don't want to see him anymore. Mando quickly cuts to the chase. He's there looking for that part to bring back IG-11, and Peli's Jawa friends, they don't even have that part. So she actually works to convince Mando to buy a different droid off of her. An astromech rolls in, and we all know that this is R5-D4. This is probably one of our biggest Easter eggs in this episode. R5-D4 first appeared in Star Wars A New Hope. He's the droid that Uncle Owen initially tries to buy before settling on R2-D2. It turns out R5-D4 is actually a hero of the rebellion because he somehow felt that R2-D2 needed to be purchased by the Lars family, so he sabotaged his own motivator in order to make that happen. My motivator has been sabotaged for years, and all that got me was sitting in a room making YouTube videos, so I guess we all have a path. Of course, Mando is easily convinced to buy the droid, and they install it in the N1 in the same place that Grogu was supposed to be coming out of, so we all know that the kid's gonna be lap-sitting for the rest of the season. In a very Disney World commercial moment, we get to see the N1 take off, and Grogu is looking at the fireworks for Boonta Eve from within the dome. The title for this chapter is The Mines of Mandalore. To be honest, I was really surprised that he was getting there this early on. I kind of figured he'd end up going on a wild goose chase to try and fix IG-11 and maybe get to the Mines of Mandalore by like episode 6. On the way to Mandalore, Din actually starts talking to Grogu a little bit about what happened to the planet, and he mentions that he grew up on a nearby moon, Concordia. This is our next Easter egg. Concordia is the home of the Death Watch and was originally governed by Pre Vizsla. We get some fantastic visuals of of Mandalore as they enter the atmosphere here, even if the entire planet does look like a giant hole. Because of an issue with the planet's magnetic field as a result of it being bombarded by the Empire, they have no way to communicate with anybody off-planet while they're on Mandalore. Of course, this is going to become an issue in just a few minutes. The incredibly nervous R5-D4 is sent ahead to scout. R5-D4 seems to have a bad feeling about this, and unfortunately that comes true because the little guy eventually disappears. Mando's helmet pressurizes, and it is his job to go and find him. Another cool Easter egg I noticed is that once Mando's helmet is pressurized, his breathing actually sounds an awful lot like... We love our men breathing heavily and wearing helmets in this house. After traveling a short distance, Mando comes across the Civic Center. And as he's looking for R5, of course, he is attacked by another series of monsters called Alamites. Mando is getting his ass kicked, so he draws the Darksaber, and apparently he's not been practicing because the thing is still too heavy for him to really wield. He manages to get out of this bind though, knocking the Alamites down off of this cliff. He rescues R5-D4 and makes it back to the ship to greet Grogu. The atmosphere is more than safe to breathe, meaning that Mando is forced to acknowledge Bo-Katan was right. The planet is not cursed. Anyways, with Grogu now in tow, Mando goes back down that passage and they start descending through the Civic Center to get all the way down to the mines and eventually make it to the living waters. As they are in the mines, however, Mando comes across a discarded Mandalorian helmet with the lens punched out. When he pulls it out of a pile of dirt, gasp, it was an Indiana Jones style trap. He's attacked by this big mech thing that looks like it might have been an extra from War of the Worlds, the one with Tom Cruise. Yeah, that thing. So he's picked up by this thing and of course locked in a cage. Out of the mech emerges the thing that drives the mech. So the mech looks like it's from War of the Worlds, but the robot itself actually reminded me a little bit of General Grievous. And it starts removing Mando's weapons, and we can only assume that while it's got a big guy trapped in a small cage, its plans for him are not great. Grogu, ever the living legend, goes to try to rescue Pops from the cage, but ends up only making more noise. Thanks, kid. The robot comes back to lay some pain on Mando, and Mando sends the kid away with a mission: go get Bo-Katan. My biggest pet peeve with this episode is this little chase sequence that happens here. Grogu is literally just floating through the mines in his pod to try and escape, but it's really not a compelling chase sequence when this thing is literally just floating down a hallway while things are jumping at it. It honestly just feels cartoony and dumb. I get that there's no other way to do it. He's like this big, but come on. Luckily for Mando, this corny chase sequence ends quick. Grogu makes it back to the ship, and the astromech actually manages to get the ship all the way back to Kalevala so they can talk to Bo-Katan. And of course, she's still sitting there on this chair looking annoyed. I mean, she's worse than I was when I was like 13. Get a hobby, woman. You can't just sit there bitching about your life all day. So Bo-Katan is 50 shades of irritated, says she's gonna go out there and give Mando a piece of her mind, and when she storms out there and just sees Grogu, she immediately knows something is wrong. She and Grogu take off in her ship for Mandalore, and while they're on their way to find Mando, they talk about a few different things. Or rather, Bo-Katan talks and Grogu makes little generic baby noises. As they walk through the mines, Bo-Katan tells Grogu that she's actually been friends with and fought alongside a few different Jedi. Of course, I'm wishing she would have name-dropped Kenobi and Ahsoka, but what would that have done, really? While they are traversing the mines, Bo-Katan ends up having to take on a few of those Alamites, and we actually get another Easter egg here in that we see her use her hollow shield from her gauntlet. A few different Mandalorians use this weapon within the Clone Wars, so it's really cool to see it in live action. Poor Mando is still in a cage, and this robot thing has now like put in an IV and is draining his blood or life force from him. I was a little bit disturbed. Thankfully for Mando, Grogu and Bo-Katan show up to save the day. Though this robot apparently likes lightning more than Palpatine and keeps shocking the shit out of Bo-Katan, she manages to get her hands on the Darksaber and uses it against it. I don't understand where this show gets its taste for people having to fight giant robots and giant monsters like every episode, but it honestly starts getting so old. Thankfully, Din is freed. A few minutes later, Bo-Katan is making him pog soup. which Mando has apparently never had, but it's actually a staple of Mandalorian culture. She kind of dogs him for that a little bit, and I don't blame her. I once met a Cuban guy who had never eaten ropa vieja, and I didn't let him live that down either. Bo-Katan is basically just there on a rescue mission, and she tells Mando, you know what, when you're feeling good, we're gonna get the hell out of here. He tells her about this journey he's on. Again, he needs to get to those living waters, and eventually I think Bo-Katan decides to humor him and goes, you know what, sure, I'll take you to the living waters. When they make it to the living waters, Bo-Katan basically reads an inscription that's on a wall, and the inscription recounts an important part of Mandalorian culture. The living waters basically happen to be the site where Mandalore the Great first encountered and defeated the Great Mythosaur. Of course, the Mythosaur is the symbol of the Mandalorians. You can see it in several different places within the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. It appeared in last episode, and it's also the skull that Boba Fett has on his shoulder. Now, Din starts removing some pieces of his armor, and before we get excited, he just took off weapons and the cape. He didn't take off anything fun. Bo-Katan watches him as he starts reciting some cult bullshit, I mean, the creed. But as he's finishing reciting it, he just randomly like sinks into the water. Din is just not having a good day. Let's just say that. He's not having a good day. Bo-Katan thankfully jets her way all the way down there, but as she's pulling him back to the surface, there's this big eye and the sight of a horn that they kind of zoom past, and Bo-Katan is clearly shocked by as they make it to the surface. And the episode ends here. That eye and that glimpse of a horn very obviously belong to a mythosaur, which, if it does happen to be a mythosaur, is gonna be huge because they were thought to be either long extinct or never real in the first place. If Din Djarin has to fight a mythosaur, he's gonna be like the Mandalorian. He's not the Mandalorian. Like I said, I have mixed feelings about this episode. Some of those moments were really, really fantastic. I loved getting to see Bo-Katan back in action, but I very much struggle with buying Grogu doing anything action-packed because they're still selling him to us like he's a baby, so we'll buy merch, but he's already like 50 and is supposed to be a Padawan. But in regards to the pacing, I have to say that this episode moved a lot faster than the first one, and I really like that it didn't feel like some side quest-filled filler episode. And that's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 2 of season 3 of The Mandalorian in the comments below.